Well, I will go ahead and start this meeting. It is our December 1st special meeting study session at 4 o'clock. May I have the roll call, please? Francesca.
Absolutely. Councilmember Polito will be joining us shortly. So is Councilmember Hawkins-Manuelian, Councilmember DeGolia,
I'm here.
Councilmember Whitmer,
Yes, here.
and Mayor Lewis.
I'm here also. We do have a quorum, as we said. So at this time, we have the opportunity for any member of the public to make public comments. Francesca, would you like to just kind of give a little overview of how the members of the public may give public comments? And do we have any members of the public that you know that may want to speak?
Certainly. So to present a public comment, if you are accessing our meeting through the app, please select the raise your hand icon. If you are calling in, please dial *6 to unmute yourself, state your name, and you can also type in your comment in the chat box below, or if you'd like to email any comments to me, my email is in the chat box as well. I know that based on the agenda, we also have public comments being sent to Anthony's email, and I have access to that. As I can tell, we haven't received any other public comments either through his email or through me or through the text on the agenda.
And just as a reminder for the public, this is a special meeting, and so public comments will be limited to the agenda items as posted.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor. All right. Well, seeing no public comments at this time, we'll move on to our item number 3 on the agenda. It is the discussion for consideration of amendments to Chapter 8.10, quote, removal of and damage to heritage trees, end quote, and Chapter 8.14, quote, historical artifacts, end quote, of the Atherton Municipal Code for purposes of addressing historic preservation in the town. And so we have a report.
Mayor Lewis?
Yes. Oh,
This Bob Polito. I've been waiting. I've got a Zoom message waiting for the host to start this meeting. I tried it twice.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
What's that?
You are now in with us now. So
yeah, on the phone, but I'm not in on Zoom, to my knowledge.
You've got the wrong Zoom address then.
No, he's on.
I clicked it.
No, he's trying to get in on Zoom.
Councilmember Polito, I can resend you a link to your email and then let me know if you were able to join in through there.
Well, yeah, I clicked on the link that was in Anthony's previous email. This isn't my first rodeo. I've been in hundreds of these Zoom meetings, so I don't know what the problem is.
No problem. Let me just resend that. It may have been just an error. I'm resending that over to you now.
And
all right, thank you.
Okay, yeah, we've just started, Bob, so it's you haven't really missed anything except some of the, preambles.
Okay,
Bob,
go ahead.
Bob, just so you know, I've had exactly the same experience at times, that just a link sometimes doesn't work that I get from.
Yeah, me too.
Right.
So.
Okay. Well, I'm on the phone for. I can hear everything clearly, so that's
Great.
That's better than nothing.
Oh,
Yeah, we're happy to have you.
I'm glad you're here. Okay, so in the item number 3, which I just read the title of,
Mayor Lewis?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can we have Francesca do the roll call vote, please?
The roll call? No, it's not a vote.
I'm sorry, roll call for
again.
She already did.
She's done it.
So can we make a notation in the record that now Councilmember Polito has joined the meeting?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
My apologies.
No, thank you.
I've got him down. I've written his name in my book. So the report is from our principal planner, Stephanie Davis, and our deputy city attorney, Andres Boer. And so who's going to start first?
Thank you, Mayor Lewis. I'll be giving a brief presentation, and then both myself and Andreas are, will be available for questions following.
Okay.
So thank you again. Good afternoon, Council. Today, staff is presenting for your discussion and feedback the possibility of amendments to the municipal code related to historic preservation within the town. So just a brief, background. Back at your March study session of this year, there was discussion and direction given to staff related to municipal code amendments specific to historic preservation for designated historical buildings and the ability of such buildings to be given future opportunity to request entering into a Mills Act contract with the town. Yeah.
Stephanie,
Yes.
our fifth council member has just arrived. Diana Hawkinson William, thank you very much for joining us, and we will admit her onto the meeting and note that she has joined it at the time that she has joined us. Thank you.
Great.
We're on item number 3, and Stephanie is just beginning to give her staff report. Diana. Okay.
Continuing on, just briefly about the Mills Act itself. This is a state law which allows jurisdictions to enter into minimum 10-year agreements with private property owners of historically designated buildings in which the property owner agrees to actively restore and maintain their historic property in exchange for property tax relief, with the intent of such monies to be used for the historic building upkeep and maintenance. So currently the town has both an ordinance as well as an inventory of historically designated artifacts. So that includes such things as fountains, fences, and statues. However, there is no such inventory or associated regulations pertaining to any historic buildings. So following that study session back in March and throughout the spring and summer of this year, as staff worked with the city attorney's office in developing an ordinance to bring back to the council for their consideration, following their direction to address historic buildings, Mills Act contracts, and to be a standalone document from the existing town's historic artifact ordinance, SB 9 was developed and ultimately adopted, which we'll be discussing later on at your joint study session in more detail. So while SB 9 primarily provides development approval by right, it does afford some exemptions where historic designations are involved. So as such, as well as combined with the attempt to make any municipal code amendments the most comprehensive and efficient, the city attorney's office did advise on an inclusive review and update to all town regulations related to historic preservation. So this approach proposes to amend the town's existing historical artifact ordinance by maintaining all of its existing essential provisions that specifically relate just to artifacts, and combining it with new proposed provisions specific to historical buildings, the addition of language that would be specific to any future request for consideration of a Mills Act, or what we have now been referring, or what we will be referring to in the draft ordinance as a historical property, contract, as well as, further amendments to the town's existing heritage tree ordinance. So the heritage tree ordinance provisions related to historic preservation would be the proposal to designate heritage trees that qualify under certain criteria as historic trees. This is not currently done by the town. So again, the intent of such comprehensive approach is that it may be easier for the community to understand and subsequently for the town to implement all facets related to historic preservation. So that is the bit of background that I wanted to provide on the draft ordinance that is attached to the staff report being considered tonight. The draft ordinance does contain regulations, procedures, and processes that would cover 3 things: historic artifacts, historic buildings, and historic trees. that again, we are looking for some discussion and direction from the council. The ordinance within those 3 topics has been tailored specifically to each. So I'll give a brief conversation just specifically starting with historic artifacts and historic buildings. So the proposal would be to establish a historical registrar for the town that is not, first of all, intended to modify or change the content of the town's existing historic artifact inventory, nor is it intended to change any of the existing pertinent regulations regarding historic artifacts currently within the municipal code, but to evolve it into a more formally adopted town document that would also then have the ability to include any potential historic buildings and or historic trees. So as mentioned, all key provisions within the town's existing historical artifact ordinance have been carried over, into the new draft. Specific to the Mills Act, that would pertain again just to historic buildings. This also includes required language as consistent with Mills Act state law provisions that include such specifications as requiring any property owner who requested to enter into such contract to prepare a 10-year maintenance and preservation plan that would specify the nature, the cost, and the schedule of any improvements to be made to that property in order to maintain its historical content. I would like to note that the current draft ordinance has been crafted so that only a property owner could initiate such request for a historical property contract, again referred to also as Mills Act contracts within the town, and must also importantly first have already obtained historical designation by any federal or state registrar, or could request that the town consider a local historical designation, which would need to be approved by the council. Continuing on with these historical property contracts or Mills Act contracts, in order to try and protect annual property loss to the town to the greatest degree feasible, as anytime a jurisdiction does enter into a Mills Act contract or historical property contract, there will be a property loss revenue to the town. The draft ordinance, has been crafted to include draft language, which is proposed to cap no more than 5 historical property contracts to occur at one time, or more than a $25,000 annual property tax loss by the town at any one time. Additional recommended language that's included in the draft ordinance for town protection also terminates the contract after the minimum 10-year period has applied, but does give the town the ability to extend the contract should they choose to. In terms of how the property tax annual loss to the town, I do want to note that that would vary for individual properties based on their age, the condition of the property, and their current market value. But based on our research and understanding of other jurisdictions within San Mateo County that have adopted historical preservation ordinances, as well as conversation with the San Mateo County Assessor's Office, such property tax is estimated typically to be somewhere between 40 to 60% per property. Piggybacking on conversations that were had by staff with the San Mateo County Assessor's Office, we did request the office to prepare a hypothetical calculation of what a property tax relief may look like for an Atherton property should sometime in the future there be a mechanism to allow for consideration of entering into a historical property contract. So, in accordance with the state law, Such tax estimate can only be prepared by the local county assessor's office, and it must follow the guidelines and methodologies as prescribed by the State Board of Equalization. So with all that said, the hypothetical estimate that was provided to staff by the assessor's office, San Mateo County's assessor's office, on an Atherton property that is currently assessed at approximately $8 million would result in an approximate tax savings of 57% to the property. That would in turn equate to an annual loss to the town of approximately $4,200. So staff has also drafted some language as part of this ordinance for consideration. That the application process down the line to consider any future Mills Act contract also be given a preliminary review by the San Mateo County Assessor staff to be able to provide the town a more refined estimate for each individual property that may request such contracts, so that this information would be known up front and considered during the evaluation process prior to any decision being made. So lastly, as it relates to trees, or heritage trees, I should specify, the proposed ordinance approach does not change, nor does it affect any of the existing processes or regulations currently in place that pertain to heritage trees, but simply creates a new subset designation of what would be called a historic heritage tree. So by doing such, it allows the town the ability to designate specific individual heritage trees which meet a series of historical criteria as an additional layer in protection in the attempt at the preservation of their own historical character and their contributions to the town. As the ordinance is currently drafted, not every heritage tree in town would be able to be designated historic. Any individual heritage tree, as applied for by the property owner, would need to be evaluated for specific criteria and its historical contribution to the town in order for it to be considered in such a designation. So there has been a draft ordinance that has been prepared for discussion and direction. There's no request for any formal decision to be made tonight. We're happy to answer any questions that the council may have on the evolution of this ordinance from the time that you originally considered it back in March, as well as any specificities within the language of the draft ordinance itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, very much. Really thorough, and for the staff report. Open it up to members of the council for any questions. I'd like to maybe make a quick little recommendation that if we could take it in two parts, any questions that have to do with the historic artifacts and buildings, properties, residential or other buildings in town, and then we'll come back and we'll take questions having to do just with the trees. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, so any council member have a question for Stephanie or Andres about this?
Mine is only on the trees.
Okay, all right. I have a question having to do with the historical properties ordinance. And it has to do with what happens after the 10-year contract period and the owner no longer, keeps up his historical property, and it just, doesn't it just keep getting more historical the longer it lives and breathes and is in existence? It seems like, and is this a standard term?
Sure. So the 10-year contract would only be applicable to historically designated properties that subsequently request and obtain approval by the town to enter into a historical property contract.
Mm-hmm.
That the real key difference there is that by entering into such contract, that property is eligible for some property tax relief. However, there could be instances where there could be a property owner who initiates historical designation of their property, but does not subsequently request that additional tier of a historical property contract to be voided against it. So if a property is historically designated, it still is subject to the provisions in the draft ordinance, such as upkeep and maintenance, but it does not have any 10-year contract associated with it, unless there is an agreement made formally between the town. Again, we called it Mills Act contracts back in March. The terminology we have revised to change to be a historical property contract. And yes, the 10-year time frame is a minimum time frame as required by state Mills Act law.
It could be longer.
It expires after 10 years, but does allow for it to be renewed in perpetuity at the discretion of that local jurisdiction.
I see. Okay. So then my other question is about the how did we determine no more than 5 historical property contracts would be in force or no more than $25,000 maximum cap on the annual property tax loss?
It was a rough estimate, taking into a few things into consideration. One, looking at best practices of other local jurisdictions that currently have existing historic preservation ordinances, estimating at that range of 40 to 60% of annual property tax, what that would equate to. You could see the hypothetical evaluation was slightly less than $5,000. So it was a means of trying to come up with a feasible number that hopefully wouldn't have a significant impact on any financial impact to the town.
And that is within the discretion of this council. The council could certainly do more or less, but staff was taking into consideration comments made at the workshop several months ago that while conceptually interested in moving forward with this process, they wanted to make sure that they could bookend some of that property tax loss that they would otherwise be entitled to receive.
Okay, but it's not set in stone because some of our property values are more than the $8 million kind of a thing. Anyway, anybody else want to make a question about the houses or artifacts, not the trees? Diana, yes.
I have a few questions. First, do we have any idea of how many houses would actually qualify for this?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, based just on my experiences and conversations with property owners, there could be upwards of a dozen. I don't know if I do see we have a community member, Mrs. Marian Oster, here on the phone. I know she was actively involved back when the historical registrar document was created. I'm sure she could give a more refined opinion on that actually than I could. But for purposes of conversation, I know that we staff have been contacted by 2 properties who have already begun on their own some discussion of trying to obtain either federal or state designation, which if they've already pursued that would make me assume that they certainly have the criteria to obtain such designation.
Okay, Diana.
Also, what about the ones of the ones that are listed, the artifacts? Some of them are on public property, like our tower. Does the city then get some sort of discount for maintenance off of?
We don't pay taxes.
We don't pay.
We don't pay taxes, so we got a big discount.
There you go. Last question. Under SB 9, historical buildings are considered to be exempt of SB 9. Now, if this is something that we designate that's not part of the National Register, would those count? And if we did, by the time this gets into place and SB 9 is already in place, can we retroactively pull them out of SB 9? Will it still work?
We're going to have a discussion in our next hour with the Planning Commission on SB 9 and as it relates to all of this. But Stephanie, can you answer directly Councilmember Hawkins Manwalian's question?
Yeah, if I could ask the Deputy City Attorney to
Yes,
give
I'd be happy to jump in here. So local designation does count for SB 9 purposes. As far as pulling a property back after some entitlement has been granted under SB 9, we would have to look at the property's historical characteristics after whatever has been done to that property at that point. So that'd be very fact intensive looking at that. But as far as designating at the local level to count for that historical carve out under SB 9, yes, that does count.
And I wanted to provide a little bit of context about why we went with this approach. So some other communities have a lot of other property designations. Atherton is predominantly residential. And the biggest attribute is these beautiful, majestic trees that we have. And so because the term historic artifact is not defined in Senate Bill 9, we believe that, and we interpret Senate Bill 9 to allow us as the local agency to define it, to preserve some of these trees from further potential clear cutting if someone presents a ministerial application for development. So this is kind of a creative way of making sure that Atherton's unique historic artifacts, as we're going to be defining it, are protected.
Okay, so we're segueing now into the trees question, if we're kind of, but if you have another question having to do with the buildings and the artifacts, we'll circle back, obviously. So Mr. Widmer, would you like to ask your question now about the trees?
Sure, thank you. So, you know, you've already discussed a little bit, Mona, with regards to one of the reasons. Has any other community that we've looked at done historic trees?
Not that I'm aware of right now, but who's to say they won't use us as a basis and do it in the future? I'm not sure. It is definitely a very unique and novel approach, admittedly.
And I would think that there would need to be a tad bit more criteria with regards to what becomes a historic tree. I mean, we don't have like trees that on the East Coast where during the Revolutionary War, a certain war criminal was hung or something like that, like they have. You know, we don't have any place where, you know, gold was discovered under a tree. So, you know, what in your idea was some criteria that you considered that would be a historic tree?
It's in the report.
Yeah, I know, I read that, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about it. Okay.
So that was really something that we also wanted to hear more from the council on, what sort of criteria you would like to see as qualifying a tree as historic. And not knowing all of the history of Atherton, I don't know that there won't be some future revelation that there is not some historically significant tree. So we're basically leaving ourselves this option of designating a specific tree. And I'd also like to point out that this already is in your existing heritage tree ordinance. There's a classification for this kind of specifically designated tree. What we're really doing here is moving that out and giving it a label that it didn't have before.
Okay, do we have any that have been so designated? Or
No.
American Oster have we designated some?
So Bill, why don't we move off, because conceptually, you know,
All right.
without getting into the weeds with all the very different distinct criteria at this time, conceptually, let's just kind of keep it on that level right now.
I'm not saying I'm against it, okay?
I have a question that
I know Bill.
I have a question that directly follows up on that. So
go ahead, Rick. Councilman.
yeah, I was going to ask a question that I think directly follows up on what Bill said, which is, could we designate every oak tree that is over a certain size to be a historic tree?
That's a good one.
So again, I think we have to go back to and set forth objective criteria for what the council thinks.
But that doesn't address my question.
Right, but one example could be, instead of size, age, and we discover age based on size. So for example, the council could say that trees that are X years old qualify and meet one of the aspects of this. And therefore, if you are this many years old, and we know that because the diameter of the tree is this big, then that would be one of the standards that we can accomplish.
But that doesn't address my question. My question isn't a criteria question. It is, and can we designate every tree that is of a certain size, or of every tree that is of a certain age, to be a historic tree?
Yeah.
I'm not talking,
I think
it does
Samantha
establish
has-
criteria, but it's a definition rather than a listing.
I think that's a great idea.
That is, so it's City Manager Rodericks and then Councilmember Hawkins Van Mullion. You need to, yeah, okay. There
And
you go.
perhaps the city attorney can add a little further, but if the town does just say blanket, every oak tree in town above a certain size is deemed historic, therefore protected, that affects the development rights of each and every property owner who has that on their property, not just in terms of SB 9, but anything else they may do to their property. And so we probably need to be careful around that. But Mona, the way the ordinance is written now, it's property owner driven versus town designation, which I think is where Councilmember DeGolia is going.
But if we did
Yeah,
something.
but that's actually not true, because the historic artifacts were not, they weren't identified by the property owner. So it's not 100% true. The attempt to include historic artifacts, buildings, and trees under the same provision, you have to look at what we've done with the historic artifacts, and it wasn't an owner-driven thing. Some owners certainly participated, but there were actual artifacts that were identified by the town that are on that list. That wasn't owner-initiated.
Right, but I think trees are different. You can't really move a tree. You can move an artifact.
In order to develop, you're talking
Right.
about the development right of a property owner as is. Okay, let's go on to Councilmember Hawkins Manwalian. She's been very patient. Thank you, Diana.
What I was going to point out is when you have a historic designation for a house, the benefit to the user is that I get a tax write-off. If I have a tree, there's no reason why a private resident would do that. Yes, you could have the bragging right, but then what we're talking about here is limiting further development. So I think if we wanted to create a delineation of historic trees that was going to abate some of future multiplying × 4 density housing, then it really does need to be something that we say all trees above a certain age, because I can't imagine any homeowner would want to put that limit on themselves when there's absolutely no benefit, unless we somehow said, all right, if you make a historical tree, then our arborist will come once a year and maintain it for you, or there's zero benefit to doing that. There's all there is cutting your own self back.
Can we have an opinion from the Deputy City Attorney on that and the legality?
Let me start with a brief response first, and then Andreas can chime in as well. So I think that the question of whether there's value is going to be subjective, and it's going to be based on each property owner, certainly. I do not feel comfortable with a blanket ad hoc definition that would apply to every single tree within the town, because my concerns are that that would result in, if challenged, a court saying that our regulation had the effect of prohibiting development in a way that was not nuanced and specifically articulated. It basically would preclude anyone from being able to develop under Senate Bill 9, which is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is we are trying to identify that in Atherton, one of the unique resources that this community has that many others don't is some of these beautiful oak trees. And to the extent a property owner wishes to keep one, which they do increase your property value, maybe not as much as, building another unit on it, certainly, but they do have some beneficial impacts on property value. Then what we would do is, assuming that they fall in line within those standards that this council at some point in the future adopts, whether it's age, location, whether it's a history attached to it, I'm not sure, then they're eligible to have that tree be placed as a historic tree that would then be preserved. And I guess the best analogy is a property owner applies in the same way to have their home be put on the Mills Act, or a property owner requests a conservation easement on their land so that no one develops it because they believe that that open space is so valuable. So it's not unlike those, but I would advise against a general application to every single tree or most trees in the community or in our town.
Okay. Andres, do you have a follow-up on that?
Mona's covered most of it. And I guess one other thing we want to consider is that when we designate a tree on the register, we want to be able to point to a specific tree. And so if we come up with a blanket rule that designates historic trees, then we would not have a finite list of trees on the register that a property owner could look to when looking to see whether or not development is possible under SB 9.
Okay.
So that's just an additional I think George has his hand raised.
Well, I think Councilmember Widmer has had his hand up. Can he make his comment, George, first, please? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the only thing I was going to say is as opposed to a blanket thing, say a blanket, that you would be eligible if you have, like, for example, a 300-year-old oak or a 300-year-old redwood tree. We should probably have some criteria that would kind of guide people as to what they may apply for, and I think that would be something that we should probably. It's got to be something significant. That's all. That's my comment.
So an objective criteria is exactly what we're looking for that historic tree designation. So that would be a good example of one that we could put in there.
Okay, City Manager.
So I was hoping maybe either Andreas, Mona, or Stephanie could articulate what exactly happens. Let's say there's an oak on your property in your back 40 of your 1 acre lot, and that becomes a historic tree. That doesn't prevent, I think, that property from being subdivided under SB 9, but it does raise the level of analysis that staff would use when you look at what would happen on that property under SB 9. Is that correct?
That is correct. And they wouldn't be able to cut that tree in order to build a dwelling unit in that location. So they'd have to work around it.
So it essentially sticks another pin in what forms their building envelope.
Okay, that's it. Yes, Diana.
Can you clarify the difference between a historic tree? What happens, versus a heritage tree? If you have a heritage tree in the scenario that George just described, what happens then? You can't cut it down either. What's the difference?
So we would make the argument that, so backing up, a heritage tree is any of the trees we're accustomed to designating as heritage trees for the criteria that are listed in the existing heritage tree ordinance. Historic trees, the idea is to have a separate way of designating a heritage tree. All historic trees are heritage trees under the ordinance as it's drafted. And so even if there were some historically significant tree that doesn't meet the criteria for heritage trees, but it would be historically significant to the town, it could bring that under the protections of heritage trees.
But that doesn't address what Diana said.
No,
heritage trees can be cut down. Heritage trees can be cut down.
Yeah.
Heritage trees can be cut down if they're in the build area.
But a heritage tree is a historic tree can be separate from a heritage tree in that without that definition. I was at a resident's house one time delivering Meals on Wheels, and it was the most spectacular multi-branch, trunked magnolia, like a tulip magnolia that was just massive. And I don't think that would be classified in our heritage tree, environment. And I think it could have been in a building envelope, but this tree is absolutely just stunningly spectacular. And
it would be a heritage tree if it's big enough.
Yeah.
We're not,
got to add them all up. Yeah.
Magnolia isn't excluded from heritage trees.
No.
So to get back to Councilmember Hawkins-Man Williams' question, heritage trees, we would also consider when somebody brings in an SB 9 application. With what we're trying to do, we're trying to essentially broaden what could potentially be qualified as a heritage tree by adding this additional means of designating a historic tree.
So it wouldn't be harming the heritage tree ordinance at all, or the heritage trees, ability to be saved.
But no, but I don't see how it's broadening it. It is creating a new classification that is a subgroup of heritage trees. I don't see how it's broadening, and I don't see how it helps either deal with SB 9. It doesn't sound like it has any real. What's the meaning of it?
Do you
So,
have
Sally,
to?
Sally has a comment. Let's hear from Sally.
I just wanted to clarify what a heritage tree is. So a heritage tree is any species of tree that's 15.2 inches in diameter or greater. So that means you have to apply to the town to remove it. The tree has to be dead or dangerous to remove it. And also it follows the tree protection zones for construction. So I'm just a little confused too, what the difference of a historic tree is compared to a heritage tree.
Can you remove a heritage tree in your building envelope?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oak trees are protected in the main building envelope. So oak trees are already protected in the main envelope.
But if it's
But
another
other
heritage tree,
Other ones can be cut down.
it can be cut down. If it's a historic tree
It can't be.
and it's in the building envelope, then what happens?
I'm not sure.
Historic
You
tree-
There's
cannot,
nothing.
you
Then
cannot
you-
cut it down. You
Yeah,
can-
then
Wait,
you
where does it say that?
So
We're
a
creating
historic,
it. That's what we're
It
creating
doesn't say
now.
that.
No,
The
no, that
ordinance
is the
doesn't say that.
proposal. That is the
That's our
proposal
proposal.
before you.
Yeah.
That's
so
what
a historic
Wait.
tree will have a will have a same tree protection zone as a heritage tree. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yes, that's the proposed approach.
So what's the
You'll not be able
difference?
to build a main house either.
Yeah,
No,
I don't see a
think that-
difference.
I think that the intent was if it's a historic heritage tree, it may not be cut down. Or
I wonder what that
in
is.
an evaluation of dividing a lot and then building zones there, that the town would have the right to deny it because it's a historic tree.
Historic.
That's what I believe the intent was as I read through this.
Exactly.
Maybe.
Correct. That is the intent.
Yeah.
And we're here
Yeah,
with this early draft of the ordinance to try and flesh that out further and get a little bit of policy
You might
direction
want
from
to
the
take that to
council.
bed tonight and read it again, Rick. No.
I've read it. Have you? I've read the whole thing. I've got a lot of comments on it.
Let's
Believe
not
me.
get into a fight about it.
I don't know where I've read the ordinance and I don't know where in the ordinance it says you can't cut down a historic tree any different from a heritage tree. I think it's treated the same.
Okay.
Now,
Mona,
I'd be happy to be wrong. I just didn't notice it.
Okay. Rick, I'm going to call on our newest council member, Bob Polito. He's got his hand up. Bob, unmute yourself and make your comment, please.
Yeah, just quickly. I think you might have an inverse effect here, unintended consequences, so to speak. If you've got a historic tree, and if in fact the historic tree designation means it can't be cut down, it's not going to preclude development of additional housing on that property. It will affect the building envelope, and you may get some bizarre placement of housing on these lots. To me, it seems like it could be as much of a problem as it would be a help. And so I would tend to think it's okay to have historic trees, but only if they're really historic.
Yeah.
The real deal.
I think that's a really good point. However, I think part of the SB 9 formula is, the lot, if you're going to split your lot, it's got to be in half and then 40%. There's this whole formula. So I think
Well, there's rules and
Yeah.
and we're going to talk about that later.
Later,
Palo
yeah.
Alto has already done some serious work on this, which I found very interesting. I thought it was the
Yeah.
best document that was forwarded, but
you're right.
when you start with an acre, there's a million ways to get to the SB 9 qualifications, and some of them are going to be kind of trumped up if there's a tree in the way.
Mona, you were going to comment on that?
Just one. So if you look at pages 26 through 27 of the staff report, there are the attachments. They basically, and I'm summarizing, have conditions where the heritage trees can be cut down, but with a permit. And then they talk about replanting and so forth. So the idea for a historic tree was under no circumstance could you get a permit to cut it down. However, This is all being brought to you in a study session because staff has no vested interest one way or another. We want to execute the policy direction of this council. So if the council decides we do like the concept of historic trees and trees that cannot be cut down under any circumstance, we would move it forward and we would solidify the ordinance to prohibit that. If you don't like the concept of historic trees, we can certainly remove it. So I just wanted to remind everyone, this is a proposal for your consideration.
Good point. Yeah, bring us back to some reality. And so we're, having this discussion. And I think Mr. Polito's comment about potential unintended consequences, I think, we really have to look to our city planners to kind of, sketch out all kinds of scenarios such that, we don't get ourselves caught in a bind if we go forward with all of this. So what time is it? I see that we're getting some planning commission people.
It's quarter till.
Planning Commissioner Lane has entered. So is he going to join our meeting? Yes, I guess. Okay. And Matt Baker. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. And then, so you did bring us to the attention of the, in the proposed ordinance, the pages, and I'm just looking at page 29. So maybe if we want to, of 34, because it does talk about requests for exemption from the tree protection zone, the criteria for designating a historic tree, which I think is really interested, because if it has a unique appearance or in an unusual location, or the significance of the artifact or historic, but I think those are really compelling criteria. Rick, you have your hand raised.
Two things. I've looked through the ordinance. I actually don't see a difference, and the criteria is very clear. The ordinance addresses criteria and damage to historic trees, but I don't see where there's a different treatment with respect to removal of a historic tree than a heritage tree. And the language regarding removal, including the language that the city attorney referred to in terms of that is in this document, is exactly what's in the current heritage tree ordinance. Secondly, and a broader general point, not just related to trees, with respect to us drafting an ordinance to enable SB 9, my preference is, before we put the effort in to do that, we wait and see what other communities do, so that we can utilize some of what they do. And secondly, I understand there's a fairly significant effort in California to address this in some kind. Yeah. So let's see what happens with that.
Yeah.
But before we go to the whole effort of doing the ordinances, at a minimum, I'd like to see what other communities do, and we don't need to take the lead on that.
Yeah, understand. So Councilmember Hawkins Van William, and then Councilmember Widmer, you have comments?
I was just going to say that although it made it sound like I was not in favor of historic trees, I think that doing this may have a strategic unforeseen, talking about unforeseen things, with all of these new housing rulings coming up, and historic designation being something that allows an exception. It's good for us to begin to think about that. For example, the other cities that have historical design review boards have a little more freedom to do stuff than we do right now, because we didn't have that. So having these historical trees may not be a big difference, but it may end up being a political or legal difference in future housing rules that come forward. So I would look closer at it.
Okay, Councilmember Widmer.
I'd like to go back to the discussion on the Mills Act item. And so I just want to say, my point was that I believe that the $25,000, if you want to make it 30, something like that, but I thought that having a limit like that is very, very good. I would also suggest that we go ahead and we have a limit on what each property could get. So there are some very large properties here that might take up all the $25,000. And we're saying we might want to have 5 or so. I think that there are a number of homes here that would qualify for Mills Act designation. And you don't want to have the first one or the first 2 take all the money. So and we have financial considerations that we need to consider. So I want to express my support for the 25K or 30K number, whatever you would like to have. But I would like to have like a limit of, let's say, 7 or whatever, no more than $10,000 for any one property owner. And I think that designation needs to be done. On the trees, I just would like to say, if somebody has a 300-year-old tree, I'd hate to see a developer cut it down. And so I would like to see something, in that range. If we're saying it's really a historic tree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Andres, you want to make a comment on that? And then I'd like to have a comment.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not allowed to restrict individual properties we're not allowed to put it in a dollar cap on individual properties. And I think that's what Stephanie was just gearing up to say as well. The calculation for the properties, once they do qualify for the historical property contract under the Mills Act, is set out by state law and has to be calculated by the county assessor.
But what happens if we're over $25,000 then?
Well,
how do we cap it?
haven't decided that at this
We haven't decided a number. That's basically just a placeholder for the council to consider what sort of a limit as an upper bound would be acceptable.
I'd like to make my comment before you counterattack, Mr. Whitman.
Attack. Come on.
That's what I meant. But so I think maybe one of the real, and this was brought up by, I think, Councilmember Hawkins-Malolian, about how many do we really think we have in our town as a residential property, because the list that's in our staff report, I mean, those are really town-owned properties and not subject to property tax reductions or anything. But, are there, we've got 2 people, as I understand, and I don't know who they are, that have made inquiries to the town. I mean, and we think maybe there may be a dozen, or are there 20, 25? How many historical properties do we think? And and maybe it's not the entire property. I mean, there are historical fences that are on the list of historical artifacts that are on properties, okay? But they're just kind of listed in our historical artifact catalog. But there are property owners that own those fences, but maybe the rest of their property has already been redeveloped and no longer would qualify for historical preservation things. So, I mean, how would that be calculated out? If they wanted to just put that fence in a historical Mills Act.
Fences don't count. Artifacts don't count. You have to have the Mills Act is
it's the residential property, 100%. Okay, all right. So I was going down the, well, anyway, but I mean, I think that would be before we kind of limit the amount, or, really agree that this is what we're going to do, because it could be more than the 25,000. It could be more. I thought the 25,000 was a very low bar and not enough as a cap for our town. City manager.
Yes, thank you. So the cap is set by the council, and you could extend the cap at any point in time that you wanted. So if you had 5 properties and you weren't hitting the cap, and then that 6th property came along and you wanted to approve that, you could enlarge the cap at that point if you wanted to do that. Alternatively, you could tell that property owner, we're not going to approve your Mills Act agreement until one of the other 4 or 5 properties goes into the notice of non-renewal phase. And then as they do that, their property taxes that they pay gradually increase back up. It's not a sharp immediate increase up. It's a gradual increase back up. And so the amount of tax loss would be less and would relieve some of that cap. You
Interesting.
could tell them to wait.
Okay, Councilmember DeGoya.
Yeah, so I have a question related to what George said and a statement. And the question is, once a property finishes its 10 years and therefore if it's not renewed, it goes off the Mills Act's treatment. You just said that the property tax then goes up slowly, not in a single jump. And as it goes up slowly, is the amount of reduced tax revenue in the years after the 10th year, would that be counting toward the 25,000 cap?
Mhm.
That's
I assume it would.
okay. So that's a question that we need answered by someone who's
That comes
certain
down to how we calculate our cap.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we need some advice on how to do that. But let me the statement that I had is I just think everybody needs to be quite aware that the $25,000 that we're talking about is $25,000 of reduced taxes to the town of Atherton.
Right.
The homeowner
Right.
has reduced taxes to the county. And if we have a $25,000 reduction for Atherton, that's somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 of reduced taxes that have gone to the county.
Over the 10-year period.
No, each year. Well,
No.
for 25,000, whatever it is.
25,000 a year.
We get 8%.
It's each year.
Yeah, if we get 28%.
If we're taking a $25,000 reduction each year over the 10 years, then the county is taking, a $250,000 to $300,000 reduction. So for 10 years, we're really impacting tax revenue to the county between $2.5 and $3 million.
Yep.
I'd like to see that. That's not how I understood it.
Well,
You take
that needs to be
$25,000
clearly understood.
0.08.
Yeah.
Take $25,000, divide it by 0.085, and it comes out to be almost $300,000.
It's reducing the overall tax base for the property across all agencies.
So I just think everybody needs to be aware of it. I'm not opposed to it. I think it's the right thing. I think the 25,000 is a pretty good number for us to use. So the feedback to council is I think it's pretty good. But it does mean a $3 million tax loss to the county. And actually, given what George just said, that the taxes don't jump back up after 10 years, it's actually more than a $3 million tax loss because it's going to go back up incrementally.
Yep.
I'd like to see a chart on that.
Can a city level make that decision for a county level tax without their buy-in?
What it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, that seems odd to me.
So Mona, you have a comment.
I do. I'm actually shifting gears a little bit. We're getting very close to 5 o'clock, and we should take public comment on this item before we follow our joint study session.
Sure. We may run over a few minutes, but that's okay. All right. This was all very, very good discussion. A great presentation. Thank you all for the lively. We'll probably, look at this again. Cities all over are doing that right now. So any member of the public, Francesca, are there any members of the public who'd like to make a public comment about this?
No, Mayor, I don't see that anybody had emailed me. And when I looked through Anthony's email, nobody had sent him an email either, nor through the text. And I don't see anybody on the chat as well.
Okay, great. Well, with that, if it's okay with everyone, Mona, I'm just going to close this part of our meeting. We're going to close the study session of the City Council, and we're going to, I'm going to invite Chair, where'd he go? Eric?
Lane.
There you are. Okay, I was looking for your name. Chair Lane from the Planning Commission to open the Planning Commission meeting at 5 o'clock.
Bob has a comment first.
Say what?
Bob has a comment first.
Just very
Sorry,
quickly.
I didn't see him. There
That's
you
right.
are. Okay.
I have a month's old obligation, so I'm going to leave the Zoom and call in and stay on till 6 o'clock. But I can't get out of this.
That's okay.
So I
Understood.
apologize. It's something that's been set in stone for a long time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you when you call in.
Yeah, and I have no idea how I raised my hand from my cell phone, but we'll find out, I guess.
Well,
Star
just start
nine.
yelling at me.
Star
Okay.
nine. Star
All right,
nine.
thank you.
Bob.
Thank
Bob,
you.
it's star nine.
I got it. Thanks.
All right. Chair Lane, you've got the floor.
All right, I'll go ahead and open that. I have my Zoom certified gavel here. So we'll go ahead and open up the Planning Commission for the joint session.
Do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Conce, she is not in. Commissioner Lerner. Thought I saw her.
I see her down there.
Yes. Sorry,
She's on mute.
ask her to unmute. Commissioner Narancic.
Here.
Vice Chair Lamb.
I don't see
And
it.
I don't see earlier.
I'm gonna have to pick up the phone right there. I'm gonna have to
Chair Lane.
supplement this with a phone.
Yes, here.
Can I get to
Nancy,
my
you're
phone?
on. You're on now.
I don't know what the right there.
Can you? Nancy, yeah, she took her mute on for a minute. We know she's there.
Here, let me assist her. And Chair Lane.
Yes, here.
You have a quorum?
Just barely. Yes, we do.
There we
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that I've been instructed to ask for any disclosure of ex parte communications.
Well, the
Discussions,
speakers aren't working.
any discussion between council
Dial in
and
and you'll
board of
get audio.
commissioners
Yes, that's what I was just going to.
regarding the special entitlements or property owners impacted by the discussion or agenda items of this meeting. It should be disclosed at this time. Such disclosure means that you must disclose who you spoke with and the nature of your discussion.
So I had no
Trying
discussion.
to, but it won't work.
This is Eric. I've had no discussions.
I have no disclosure.
Okay.
Sure, I've had disclosures. I have a disclosure. I've spoken to several people that have asked me questions about SB 9 and subdividing their properties. I think it's a common thing. It's been coming up for over a year. And I think every one of the council members has had discussions and have heard from constituents on what the impacts of SB 9 are and what can happen and what can they do. And so to say I've never talked to anybody, I think is inappropriate for all of us, except for maybe Bob.
So the test here for the ex parte communication is if you know of a property owner or an applicant who has a pending or proposed application before the town, and you are aware of this and you've spoken with them about that specific application, please disclose who specifically you've spoken with and the nature of your discussion. But if you've had general discussion.
Okay, I've spoken, for example, with Donna Rada that brought up his item, and when we were talking about SB 9 several months ago. When he wanted to build something on the side. That wasn't me. Okay, so
Anyone else?
I don't see that that's appropriate, really, but okay.
Okay, anyone else? We've got a big crowd now.
Randy's here now, so you may want to specifically get him on the agenda as being here, and then you may want to ask him the same question.
Yeah, sorry, I just couldn't find the Zoom link, but yeah, I got on. I kind of heard some of the discussion, but go ahead.
So the most recent disclosure that the city attorney has asked us to ask all members of the planning commission and the council is if you've had any discussions with any property owners or other owners that specifically about SB 9 or what we're going to be talking about if they have a project that may be pending.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, neither. No. Okay. All right. Well, going on to our next agenda item. It's a part of agenda item number 3, and it is the summary of Senate Bill 9 that provides for ministerial approval of 2 residential units and or a lot split in single-family residential zones. And I'm going to turn it over to our planning. But Stephanie, are you going to take this, or?
Hi, good evening.
I think Lisa's gonna take it. And just by background for everyone, since we are having our joint study session, which is not typical in Atherton, staff will provide the staff report. We'll open it up to questions from the council, following up questions by the planning commissioner. Once questions from both bodies are completed, we'll open it up for public comment. And then the goal is to seek direction to present something in the future to the Planning Commission and Council.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. So Lisa Costa-Sanders, Town Planner, and I'll be giving the presentation. And I'll just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great, yes. Thank you. So the topic for this evening is Senate Bill 9. Senate Bill 9 was recently adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor. It's intended to increase the availability of housing in California. It applies to all single-family zoned parcels within the state, and it allows for ministerial, that means staff level approval, of up to 2 units per lot. And it also allows a lot split and then up to 2 units on each resulting lot. I just want to mention that this bill is very complicated and it's not clearly worded. I've attended several webinars hosted by ABAG with legal experts, and they noted that they have more questions than they have answers. I've met with several planners from different jurisdictions, different city attorneys from different jurisdictions, and our city attorney and the assistant city attorney has also done extensive review of this ordinance, this bill. So it's going to evolve a bit, as each jurisdiction adopts the implementing ordinances. And we may see legal challenges and we may see interpretations from the state HCD. And so this evening, we're going to give you our read of the bill, but we also may say, yes, we believe that's what we can do. And then we're going to take it from there. So just to compare the existing town's ordinance with what's allowed under SB 9. So right now we have a minimum 1 acre lot. So if you had a 1 acre lot, you could not further subdivide it. Under SB 9, you could subdivide that and create a total of 2 lots. So from where you have 1, you could create 2. The minimum lot size is 1,200 square feet. However, really not applicable in Atherton. What you're going to see is that 1 lot would be at least 40% of the original lot size. So let's say we have that minimum 1 acre, it's more likely you're going to get 2 kind of half-acre parcels. Under existing town ordinance, we have minimum lot depth and lot width. The SB 9 provisions don't specify, so we're going to need to create something that's reasonable to be able to implement. As well as setbacks under town ordinance, we have for that standard 1 acre lot scenario, 60-foot front and rear, 50-foot side. SB 9 does have a 4-foot side and rear provision, similar to what you've seen in the accessory dwelling unit regulations.
But if the lot is not that deep, as your double asterisk shows,
correct,
then the setbacks change. Is that not correct?
Right. Then it would be 30% of the lot depth if it's less than 200 feet deep.
Okay.
Yes. So there's a lot of what ifs. Same with the setback, the side yards. If the lot's narrower than kind of that standard acre, there's also step-ins as well for the side setbacks. So these are very general to give you a big overview. Okay, so our existing then development standards is on that 1 acre standard lot, you can have 1 main dwelling unit, 1 residence. You could also add an accessory dwelling unit that could be detached or attached, and you can have a junior accessory dwelling unit. So under today's rules, you can have a total of 3 housing units on your property. Under SB 9, the bill specifically says 2 dwelling units per lot. We can talk about that a little bit more. We have a maximum allowed floor area. That's based on the lot size, 18% of lot area. Again, a lot of asterisks because if you have a smaller lot, there's a different ratio that takes into account. In the R1A zoning district, we do have a minimum of 2,250 square feet. So regardless of your lot size, you get to at least build 2,250 square feet. Under SB 9, it establishes a minimum of 800 square feet per dwelling unit. Then we just kind of ran a couple of scenarios, what ifs, right? So let's just say somebody came in, they have that 1 acre lot and they want to split it under SB 9. So one scenario is lot 1 becomes 0.6 acres and lot 2 is 0.4 acres. So you see the resulting lot size there. You have a total of 2 lots. On lot 2, they could build 2 main residences on lot 1 as well for a total of 4 main residences. There's also a scenario where maybe they just build 1 main residence and the town allows an ADU or a JDU. But how we see that bill reading is we could limit it to no more than 2 residences per lot if they take advantage of any provision under SB 9. As well, like as is indicated on the setbacks that we talked about earlier. And then the maximum floor area would still apply here. So this town's regulations. So under lot 1, let's just say they built 2 main residences, the total floor area for all the buildings is 4,986 square feet. And then as well, 3,566 for that lot 2 scenario. And then as you know, our current ordinance, if we were to allow ADUs, does have that ADU provision of an 800 square foot. But we do have the ability to limit ADUs and say no more than 2 units per lot.
Lisa, I thought that the ADUs were 1,000 square feet if they had the 10-foot setback, and then they were smaller to 800 if they were within
the 4-foot setback.
Right. So they could
That's
be
correct.
up to 1,000 ADUs. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And then a scenario under the R1B. So these are some of the smaller lots in town where if they were to do the lot split, the resulting lot area would be about 5,445 square feet per lot. And again, the same kind of scenario where you can have 2 main residences and then the setbacks vary. And then we're also looking here at what that maximum floor area would be, 2,398 square feet per lot. George, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. You know, when they subdivide under SB 9, one of the thoughts was early on that they're going to get the main residence on both lots. They'll get a junior ADU and they'll get a ADU. So there'd be up to 6 units where there only used to be the possibility of 3. But under as it's being interpreted, that's not the way it'll work out. They're only allowed to get a maximum of 4 between both lots, and then they can't subdivide again under SB 9 for either of those 2. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's how the town attorney has interpreted. That's how your town staff has interpreted it, as well as other jurisdictions. There's consistency that we believe there's a maximum of 2 units per lot. So even that's an ADU, a JDU, 2 main residences, no more than 2 units. Mona, did you want to add?
Councilmember Widmer wanted to
Yeah.
say.
What about duplexes? Does that count as 1?
2 units.
Okay, so a duplex would be like an ADU and a JADU connected.
Correct. You don't also then get another ADU.
But they're
A max 2 units per lot.
When we get to page 8 of your presentation, Lisa, that really does clarify a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
maybe we
thank
can
you.
hold comments until she finishes some of her presentation.
Just so we included in the packet some information prepared a study by the Turner Center, and they've kind of evaluated it and said the most financially viable option for most single-family homeowners is to maintain the existing single-family condition. We're also working with a consultant team to assist us with the housing element update. And they also ran some scenarios for us under SB 9 and even independent of that, because I had asked them, what if we reduce the lot size in Atherton and allow some smaller lot developments? Would it realize much development scenarios? And they said very minimally, because what's financially advantageous in this community is those larger estate properties that we see. So we'll kind of have to take a wait and see approach, but it's unlikely we're going to see a lot of development under SB 9. So staff expects the use of SB 9 in Atherton to be limited to more lot splits and the construction of one single family residence per lot. We do not anticipate seeing much of those duplexes. In that scenario, one house would be an ownership unit and the other would need to be rented, similar to how they would rent out an ADU. So we would not have to approve kind of a condo scenario with the duplex where they could sell both units on that one lot. SB 9 does provide an opportunity for the town to realize new housing units with those lot splits, and that could assist us towards meeting the town's RENA obligations. We can discuss that a bit further. So as far as next steps, staff would like to bring forward an implementing ordinance to the Planning Commission early next year for study, and then it would move forward to City Council for formal consideration. And one thought is that we establish a maximum of 800 square foot per residential unit if those SB 9 setbacks are utilized. So if they want to do the 4 feet, great. You get the 800 square foot unit and it would be limited to single story. And that is consistent with what the SB 9 law provides. We would be able to apply the existing floor area setbacks if the existing setbacks are utilized. We could discuss allowing an additional ADU if only one residence is constructed per lot. And then we could prohibit ADUs on lots that create 2 dwelling units. So that's an item that can be discussed further. Establish minimum lot dimension standards, making sure we can still implement the lot splits. We could consider other objective design standards that could apply. The law has a provision about a 3-year owner occupancy requirement. There's some parking requirements the town does not currently have in place, so we can look at those. And then any other provisions that are requested by the Planning Commission and City Council. So the city attorney and I would now be happy to try to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You're, as always, very concise and very informative. Councilmember Widmer has his hand up, and then Councilmember DeGoya and Andres and Commissioner Lane. So Councilmember Widmer, you want to go first?
Sure, no problem. So, I would think that we would keep the 1,000 square feet if the setbacks are 10 feet or more, also,
that would be ADUs, right? My
correct.
concern
Well,
is
you had
if they were
800
to build a new main residence 10 feet from the side setback, that meet the town's floor area limits, and there's 2 stories.
No.
So my suggestion was we consider the regular setbacks if you're applying to the floor area standard.
So if they built a regular residence, they maintain the setbacks, they would be able to have a square footage that's within
I think we're asking for questions now, Mr. Widmer. We're not asking for
I was getting a clarification.
Well, no, because you were, okay, fine. Councilmember DeGoya, questions? You're on mute. Please unmute. Let's do questions.
On the bullet point that says allow addition of ADU if one residence is constructed per lot. Is it accurate that under SB 9, there has to be allowed a minimum of 2 units per lot? Is that correct? If someone subdivides, we can't limit them just to 1 unit per lot.
That's correct.
Okay.
They're entitled to have 2 units per lot after the division.
And if they have 2 units, we could prohibit additional units on that lot by prohibiting ADUs. I think we should do that. And I think we should require
opinion. Let's just do questions for right now.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Lane, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have questions. There's one bullet on page 2 of the packet we received. It talks about design reviews. And I know we don't have design reviews here, but in this case, the question I had was, would it be acceptable to have design reviews only for this situation where the lot is being split? That's one question. The next question is around the parking requirements, which are a substantial, interesting problem for us. have we done any review of within a half mile of walking distance for high quality transit corridor and major transit would require us not to have standard parking requirements, so that it seems that there would be no requirement for parking on those locations. So my question is that true? And then I'll have some more later on about parking in general. Like, even though we don't require it in the structure, can we have a design review process for off-street parking on the site? Because one of our key things in the city is there's very little parking on the street.
Okay.
And that'll be a problem. Anyway, I had 3 questions there.
So responding to the question about the design review just for this scenario, that wouldn't be possible. The objective criteria we can impose have to be generally applicable. So we couldn't single out this type of application for that kind of a review.
Okay.
As far as the parking, I would look to Lisa. I think she's done some looking at that half-mile radius.
Yeah, we can bring forward a map when we do the analysis further, but essentially El Camino Real would be considered the high quality transit corridor. And I think we can look at objective design criteria, something similar to what we have about, exterior lighting shall be shielded and downlit, and, things like that could apply townwide.
All right. And Middlefield wouldn't be one of those streets?
No.
Okay.
Well, there are bus routes on it.
I don't believe there's the frequency of the headway, but we can confirm that.
I believe there is.
Any other council members or commissioners have a question for Lisa? I do, but go ahead. Any other? Yes, Mr. Narancic.
Yes, hello. I have a question on page 2 of 30 of the staff report. It wasn't clear to me if, Lisa, you could confirm or clarify what the law permits in terms of the town's ability to set a minimum lot size.
I might have froze. So the town, I think we would need to establish that the minimum lot size would be 40% of the original parcel area.
Oh, okay.
So there is part of Atherton that does not have the 1 acre.
Correct.
Minimum. So if you've got a 20,000 square foot lot, is it the 40% figure that applies to that as well?
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. I see Councilmember Hawkins Manuelian has her hand up. Diana, unmute and ask the question.
I was just going to ask what Rick asked earlier. Is someone going to summarize for us what other cities are doing on this? Is that still coming up?
Yes.
I can certainly do that now if you'd like.
Well, that's really in a lot of detail, but go ahead. I just, yeah.
Well, some jurisdictions are doing urgency ordinances to kind of put something in place quickly. And those jurisdictions generally have high fire hazard severity zones and earthquake zones. And so that's at the basis for those findings. And then they're looking at kind of implementing some of the things that we talked about, right? If you use those minimum setbacks and you also have the minimum size of the unit. And we can prepare a more formal comparison for the staff report when we bring that forward for consideration. But most jurisdictions are bringing forward some ordinances early next year for formal consideration.
George sent us a really good links to a number of different informations, including council sessions and articles. So that was very useful. Thank you, George.
Palo Alto, Los Altos Hills, Cupertino. Now, Alex, I'm sorry. Are you a planning commissioner?
No, I'm not. I'm just a member of the public.
So we're not ready for you just yet.
I'm just getting ready. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. I just didn't want to ignore you. I just wanted to, so I'm sorry. Quickly, I just wonder in our town, I think we have how many parcels? 2,800 parcels, individual parcels?
2503.
What do you think?
2503.
Well, that's what, but then I saw recently a number that was much higher than that, and I was kind of shocked. But anyway, so have we done, or could we do an inventory of 1 acre 1 acre sites, the standard Atherton acre, that have not been redeveloped with larger homes on it in the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah, well, I could tell you that we have 68 vacant lots. So that means 68 properties that do not have a main residence on it, but it may be associated with a main residence, right? A garden and an accessory structure. But we could also do an inventory of 1 acre lots that have older residents on them, like you're saying. Yes.
Because I would think that would be obviously that's my comment. I'm not going to comment. So anyway, any other, Commissioner Lane?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Can we have Lisa walk us through slide 8 just to make sure? Because I think that gives the best examples to me of the different scenarios and what we could expect per site. And bringing up the vacant lot brings up a couple of different scenarios. So
let's look at that. Slide 8.
It's a really handy, it's actually from the packet that we received.
Do you have that there? It talks about what we might bring forward with an implementing ordinance.
This page right here.
Oh, sorry, I don't have that graphic. So that was prepared by 21 Elements as a draft to kind of give some nice examples. And that's, I'm sorry, 21 Elements is the group of all the cities in San Mateo County that are working together on the housing element update process.
Right.
So that's a graphic that was attached to your staff report just to kind of help visualize what might be implemented. And then these are the standards that we were talking about possibly bringing forward for your consideration in the future.
So the questions I had were around 2 examples there in terms of how they actually work. And one of the examples is A3 and D3, because it looks like somebody could have 2 completely separate units. A3 and D3 were the most, potentially creating the most traffic and most changes, and that's where my concern around the parking would be, and off-street parking and all these other elements. Those are the ones that look like people would be buying them for, on D3 and A3, are those 2 on the 2 main units that are shown, the bigger units? Are those individual properties owned by individuals?
So A3 and D3, you would have 2 property owners. So that little dash line in the middle would represent the 2 different lots.
Okay.
So there's 2 property owners, and then the other would be 2 rental units, 1 on each property.
Yeah.
These would not be 4 ownership units unless that is something the town would like to add to the subdivision ordinance. But that's not currently what's specified in SB 9.
Okay.
So it'd be but potentially from a living situation, it's an owner that is renting out to someone they're not related to?
Certainly, similar to how you would rent out an ADU today. Yes.
Right.
Okay. So we're still on questions right now because we want to get to the public for questions. And so are there any other members of the council? Mr. Widmer, hi, there you are. You went away.
Well, okay, I'm sorry, I'm here, but anyway.
You have a question?
Yes, I do. So on the Turner presentation, they went through what lots were available, and they worked down a funnel, and they said that they had some way of calculating what would actually be the potential uptake. Is there a way that we could contact them and find out what that formula was? Because I think that gives us a better understanding of really what could happen here. If you looked at that report, it really distilled down. And then, of course, then that would be a number that I would be comfortable in putting into our RENA calculations, as opposed to just saying every lot that doesn't have an ADU is going to be developed, because I think that's going to get us into trouble.
I think that's a good question. So Lisa, can you answer that question?
Yeah, I know Turner Center really studied on larger jurisdictions and didn't drill down to Atherton, but we did have a separate economic analysis of Atherton, and we can provide that information with the number of units that are likely to be developed here.
That would be great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to open this item up for public comment, and Alex has been very patient and waiting. Alex, you want to go with your question or comment, because at this point you can make it.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have kind of two sets of questions. One is about the 3-year residency requirement for splitting lots. What happens if that owner is some kind of corporation, LLC, or trust? How do they say you live here or don't live here? Or it has to be a real actual person? And who actually enforces it? So if they actually turn out not to be living there, does the city sue them, and what penalties are there?
That's my question.
Good question. Mona?
Would you like me to answer as they come along, or wait till all the comments have been
Let's
received?
answer that. And if
Yeah,
Mona,
my understanding from the attorney on behalf of the ABAG webinar, and I'll have Mona also give her interpretation, is that it has to be an individual. It cannot be a corporation. And they would be certifying under perjury of law that they would be living there for 3 years. So if they were not, then we would find them, to have perjured themselves. Mona, help me here.
Well, what we can also do is we can establish in an ordinance that will come before you at some point early next year, a requirement that they record like an owner occupied covenant on their property or something of that nature. But yeah, that would essentially be those two would be the mechanisms.
The League of California Cities said at the council, this will not be enforced. I just want you to know that. The lawyers at that session said, well, it's written in there, but it will not be enforced. It's really not an enforceable thing. It was just kind of a hand wave. So I just cannot see that that's going to happen.
That's what I thought too. I was afraid of that.
Alex, you have anything else?
Yeah, one more set of questions. In the R1B areas, are the current rules pretty permissive in lot splits? R1Bs are kind of the smaller ones, and is SB9 going to change it? So if they're not permissive, I guess then SB9 will kind of change the conditions to make it more permissive. Okay, because yeah, the less than an acre lots I know have been split before, and I live in that area, and so certainly we could probably see more density then if that occurs. So okay, thank you.
If I could just quickly clarify, the R1B lots have not been split previously. We've had this minimum 1 acre in place for quite some time. But what there is occurring in this zoning district is some properties have 2 lots from an original subdivision that were never merged, and one house was constructed over those 2 lots. And so many times you demo that house and they're able to reinstate those 2 separate parcels and build 2 houses.
That's
so it's based on the original subdivision.
Okay, I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other members of the public?
Mayor Lewis, I had Don Arata, he reached out to me. He wanted to present the 2 pictures. Mr. Arata, go ahead. I'm actually going to be going to share my screen and just.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Hi, Don. Yes, you've got the floor.
Good afternoon, evening, Mayor Lewis and the other council members and some new faces. My name is Don Arata, and the reason I'm participating today is to discuss 23 Oakwood Boulevard, which for those of you who don't know where this property is in Atherton, it's off of Selby Lane. It's on the border of Redwood City and Atherton. And going back, I think it was back in February, before SB 9 came out and was enacted, we had a brief conversation about this, but didn't get too far along. At this point, since this SB 9 is now active, I thought that it would be the time to reshare with some of you that have already seen this, and with some of the new faces, the new council member, is to talk a little bit about the project. I know I've only got 3 minutes, so I'm trying to go quick here. There's 2 different views here. One is a site plan and one is a conceptual. The conceptual, this was altered, tweaked a couple times because Lisa gave some input and said, if this is to be considered, you're going to want to Atherton-y the front of this property. And so we did that, and that's what you're seeing there. So it kind of, those are individual like townhomes, but they look like a big home. So the purpose of me trying to go through this, actually, can we show that other page, please? There you go. So the parcel is rather long, and on the top, the north of that is the Redwood City border. And, you know, without trying to do this in the middle of Atherton, we thought, in light of SB 9, that this would be a good benefit for the city to, so to speak, knock off multiple, you know, fulfill your needs, so to speak. So at this point, before myself and my siblings go to the next steps, I would just like to get an idea. Can the council, can you share your thoughts? I mean, some of you have seen this, some haven't. If this has getting any traction or not, maybe Lisa can chime in on that.
Yeah, Don, not at this meeting.
Lisa,
okay.
Can I have Mona make
Well, I have a solution though.
Well,
Okay.
actually, it's not, we don't have any specific projects agendized. So for that reason alone, we shouldn't be talking about it. But also, this is a general discussion where we're trying to do a study session and get direction. So,
understood.
So planning commission and council, please do not make comments.
And Lisa, you want to follow up?
When it would be appropriate, because we did discuss this previously, we talked about some concepts as to meeting your housing element update goals. And I'm going to be bringing back some further refined concepts at your meeting, hopefully in January. And so Don, I'll reach out to you and we can coordinate before that meeting and it'd be more appropriate to discuss it then.
Very good. Fully understood.
So we're not going to discuss that or at this
Oh,
point?
Jesus.
That's good. Thank you, Don.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to chit chat, and I'm sorry I asked the question.
Well, it wasn't on the agenda. Councilmember DeGoya, sorry. I get you guys mixed up.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on some of the suggestions that were in the staff report. I think the idea of allowing, if there is a lot split, we don't have any choice but to allow the 2 units that maybe the owner may choose to build, whether they do it as a duplex or put different units on the separate lots. I think the state law governs, but we can prohibit ADUs on those lots if the lot is split. And I think that we should do everything that we can to minimize what is going to be, to the extent this actually happens, a serious parking and congestion problem that changes the character of Atherton. So the idea of prohibiting the ADUs, I think, is wise. I think the suggestion from staff about limiting the development to single-story buildings is exactly the right decision. And I think that the idea of including, given the allowances within the law, of prohibiting any amenities is also appropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other member of the council have a comment at this point? Diana? Unmute yourself. Yeah, good.
I do. I would like to pull back for a minute. One of the goals of this whole thing is, one, we're required. So there's some things that are being laid on us. And second, we do have to add more housing. So what we should focus on is adding the kind of housing we want. So hear me out. One of the things Rick said is making 1 story. I could see on first knee jerk, that's a good idea. But if we wanted to do additional development in the city of Atherton to keep the houses and have the feel of the city, the best way to add additional housing is to allow ADU units above existing garages. And if you did that, then you would not be building on more land, not be covering more grass. You'd just be making buildings. Now we raised the ceiling requirements, I think, to something like 18 feet. Someone can help me out here, but that's just short of someone being able to actually do a 2-story garage ADU. So if we change that rule, and that's one of the things we can change, at least I think we can from what I read, we could say that we can allow a taller building over a garage, which might promote more people to build things like that, which are not making more buildings, but instead is just making one building that already exists slightly taller. And then it's still an ADU and it qualifies for all the other things that we want to have happen.
Okay, thank you. I would just like to respond to that. I think one of the problems in increasing the height of an existing garage, it's close to your perimeter fence. And the reason the height of those garages that have a closer setback to your neighbor's fence, your neighbor's yards, is that the height is minimized. So I would find that to be a hard sell. I think maybe the conversion of pool houses or other kinds of, outbuilding structures that are not so tall, but that are closer to the setback of the fence, if they were converted on a legal basis to be an ADU, I think that would be a pretty easy thing to do if we could do existing structures. I'm not sure we can, because I think they want new structures built. So Councilmember Widmer, you have your hand up. You have a comment on this.
Yeah.
Is the public comment section closed, Mayor Lewis? Are we closed? Did the public comment?
I think the public section is closed. Do we have more public comments?
Looking at my email and also in the chat box, I don't see that we have any public comments.
Yeah, I think there was.
Do we by any chance have a Gebbia on the line?
Yes, I actually want to see, she's been trying to get online. She was able to join. She's online via phone. I just wanted to put that for the record that she joined.
So does
like to unmute
Commissioner Constant. Mm-hmm.
Say what?
After Mr. Widmer, I have a few questions as well.
Okay.
Let her ask the question.
Why don't we let you go first as a member of the public?
I have a comment. Let her ask the questions.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
Yes, we'll let you go first, Gabbia, because you're a member of the public.
She's
the commissioner.
A commissioner. Oh, absolutely. Okay, sorry.
Mike.
Gabbia?
Why don't you let Mr. Widmer go first?
Okay.
I know we're spending a lot of time and we're doing a lot of limiting and things like that. The intent of all these laws that are coming down, and they'll be refined this year. We need to recognize that based on what everybody does. And if they're done so that, hey, you can make the RENA numbers without doing anything and without allowing anything and with restricting everything, then there's going to be more and more laws from some of even, our local assemblymen and senators are very pro housing development. We've got to recognize that. And so I think that we have to be careful not to overly restrict things, but we need to be careful as to what we want and where we want. Parking seems to be something that we really want to do, and we want to make sure it's covered. Okay, I got that. Figuring out how many we possibly could have, that's another thing. But at the end of the day, there needs to be some additional development here that traditionally isn't here in Atherton, whether it's more ADUs or allowing a couple duplexes here and things like that. I don't want to change the character of the town, and I don't think any of us do. But we also need to recognize what the intent is, and we need to recognize that stuff is coming. We've been talking about this for several years. This housing stuff is a freight train coming, and we're not going to be able to stand in front of it and stop it. And so we need to do something to show good faith. I just wanted to, say that. I just think it's important that we keep that in mind. Thank you.
Okay, Gabby, would you like to make your comment now?
Yes, I would agree with Mr. Widmer as well, that this is, forthcoming. The only caveat, I think, is some of our council members in Los Altos Hills, they've even implemented like a state of emergency where they can delay some of these things, these matters to go forward. And I'm sure our city attorney's been looking at some of those options, because this might be a public safety issue, resource issue. And again, I think in total, we have to remember we're in the middle of a pandemic. So, some of our resources are limited as to even assessing how this would, move forward and how it would impact our community and the character of Atherton. Now, with that said, obviously, if there's new developers and these laws do go into effect, and they affect our laws, our ordinances in Atherton, obviously we have to, abide by that. But I think, why a lot of us live in Atherton is because of the character. Having granny flats, extra pool houses with extra people, requires extra safety. It's also extra resources with the fire department, with the police department, with the water and safety in general. And I think some of the other townships like Los Altos Hills have made some cogent propositions on that. And hopefully that's something that we can consider as well. So I don't know if the city attorney had any comments on that, on some kind of, response to that, because it is like Mr. Whitmer said, it's a little bit of a slippery slope, and it's nebulous right now. But to his point, we do have to comply with those requirements if that does supersede our pre-existing, Atherton ordinance and our town charter.
Thank you, Gabbia. I think Commissioner Lane has a question or a comment at this point.
Well, I don't know. Gabbia might need an answer on what she just asked too, or we could follow it up at a later date. My comment is about similar to Mr. Whitmer, is the idea that since this is coming our way, so now let's make it work for the town the way that we want it to work. And so to me, one of the ways to do that is to look at these different maps and see if we can incentivize one style over another. So do we like A2 better than D3, which I do, by the way? So come up with ways to make those easier to do, or automatic or whatever, and we comply with everything, but we incentivize what's best for the community, and that might be a way to address it also. Also, there's some residual things that might be impacted by this. Like we have an ordinance that all the construction vehicles have to be in front of the property owner's house. So that's tough to do on the smaller lots. So I can tell that from the properties next door to me that just barely get all the trucks in, and then since we're on the border with the city, they park on the other side of the street because they don't have to comply. So little types of things like that are going to be sort of the shrapnel effect of this change that we'll want to be aware of too. That's the only comment I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Lane. Our city attorney has a question or comment.
I wanted to thank you, Mayor Lewis. I wanted to respond to the questions from the planning commissioners about whether Atherton has considered enacting an urgency ordinance. And staff has brought that to my attention, and I have reviewed this issue both through the state statutes. I've also looked at some of the examples that our neighboring jurisdictions have adopted or plan to adopt. And while I'm not going to opine on the bases for which they're adopting it, specifically with respect to Atherton, I do not feel comfortable that we have the ability or the authority to move forward with an urgency ordinance for two predominant reasons. One, you have to establish that there are imminent public health and safety issues at risk with moving forward. Again, Senate Bill 9 is basically a commandment on the town. It is not an allowance. It is a you shall comply with the following regulations. And we've known, because this was passed, we've known since October. So urgency ordinances are reserved for those situations where you don't have time to act. You can't wait the 30 days and the second reading before you can study the effect of a regulation, or before you can adopt more stringent regulations. And so I don't feel comfortable. I think that we would not have a very strong chance of being able to defend it if we adopted it. And I'm adding a little bit of just my 2 cents here, but I generally am concerned that these kind of approaches are the reason why the legislature keeps drafting more and more stringent legislation about housing. So the more, communities keep doing this, the more legislation we're going to see that shoves these kind of enactments and reduces local control. We've seen it in other avenues. We've seen it with, police reform and other things. And so I think that what we really ought to, and we've seen it with the rejection of ABAG appeals from Bay Area communities for arena numbers. So I hear you. I've analyzed it. We've reviewed it. And I do not believe that an urgency ordinance makes sense. However, absolutely, we can move forward with incentivizing certain behaviors and certain scenarios. And that's exactly what staff plans on providing for the Planning Commission and the council in the coming year.
Thank you, Mona. Council Member Polito, would you like to make a comment or a question?
Yeah, I only have a few minutes left before I have to leave, but it seems like the communities that have fairly strict design review and architectural standards kind of have a leg up on this in terms of controlling what's done. Do we have at this late stage of the game any way to enhance that? And I know it's a big deal. A lot of people come to Atherton because they can kind of build what they want to build as long as they follow a few rules. But maybe that concept should be revisited, and maybe we can't do it. That's my question.
Mona?
We are not precluded from adopting design review guidelines in the future. And if that's the wish of the town, we can certainly implement them to whatever level or degree the town wishes. So that could be part of a future ordinance.
Okay.
Okay, that's my question, because that may play into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Any other members of the commission, council have any comments on this? We will continue our review. Diana, yes, I see you now.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is I think that it's really important for us to push on that home, the person living on the property. That will be one of our, because one of my biggest fears is developers coming in.
Oh, absolutely.
Property. So
Yeah.
that one we need to push and make sure there's no loopholes of how they can look like they live there and they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if the state says they're not going to enforce it, I mean, somehow we need to figure out how to enforce it. I mean, we're a small town. We can certainly kind of do that. If you were a city of the size of San Mateo, city of San Mateo, you really couldn't, because there's just too many darn houses, and properties. So anyway, yeah.
And also, this is
Abby,
my current concept. I'd like to push.
Go ahead. Yes. Oh,
Gabby, you're on mute if you want to talk, Gabby.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, my comment to the attorney Mona is so you're sort of giving us I'm doing my rebuttal with you that there's no health and safety issues. I mean, I think, as I said, there are some health and safety issues. If we have higher density, we'll have to hire more fire safety people, and also more water, electricity. Also, we're then, if there are, say, tenants, like as I said in pandemics, there's been huge evictions issues too. So people that may enter into agreements with, somebody renting their, upstairs garage may run into evictions issues. So how do you see that there's no health and safety issues? An argument that could be made that other cities like Los Altos Hills, Woodside can make. I don't really see your point on that. Are you covering all the bases? Because there might be some health and safety issues as it pertains to services for Atherton residents.
Abby, I'm going to take a question or a comment from Councilmember Hawkins-Man William before having City Attorney respond, if that's okay with you.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
I would like to add to what she said. For example, on the Welch Road area, where we have kind of an emergency or evacuation route issue, and that there's only one egress out for all those people, and it's high canopy. So that could be an area that we want to explore. there could be a viable argument made that that area should not be denser, because then we would have to put in place more things than we do already for emergencies.
Those good comments. So it occurs to me that some towns have created historic overlays in their towns, and maybe Linden, just Lindenwood as a historic environment. If you had a historic overlay, that would kind of protect that whole community. I don't know if there's any other ways that areas where you could do that, but it does come with other restrictions which we may not want to do. So, right, Lisa?
That's correct. And as I indicated, the other jurisdictions that are referenced, they have designated high fire hazard severity zones. Atherton does not. The jurisdictions also have fault lines that run right through the jurisdiction, and we do not. Keep in mind also, today you can build essentially 3 dwelling units on your property. And what we're looking at under this law is be a total of 4. So we're really looking at kind of a net 1 scenario per existing lot, just to kind of put it in context.
Yeah, it's a little hard to get our head around that, because it just seems so egregious what we're being mandated to do. We want to try to mitigate that as much as possible. Okay. Well, we're getting pretty close to our adjournment time. Do we have any other pressing comments or questions that have been left unanswered? And how are we going to wrap this up at this point? City Manager, Mona, Lisa?
Motion to adjourn.
I do think we have good direction, and we'll be working on a draft ordinance for discussion at a planning commission meeting, and then it'll come forward to you.
We have a lot of homework. We have a lot of homework between now and probably late February, March.
Yeah,
January 1. It all takes effect January 1.
Yeah.
It is a work in progress at this point. So, all right.
Do we know if there's any people who are applying to use this already? Because in the local press, there's been a lot of articles about developers are sitting waiting to apply January 1st to split lots and put multiple units. Do we know of any of those in the wings here?
I've talked to a couple of developers that do a lot of work in town, and they are not interested in pursuing this. We have heard from a homeowner that is interested in buying a lot and splitting it and building one house. And I don't know, Stephanie, if you've had any more detailed conversations with anybody.
No, the only conversations I have had have been with developers who do not want to pursue the avenue of SB9.
We're liable to hear from Don Arata.
Yeah. Again, I would really like to explore and know what we're looking at, how many lots are maybe prime candidates, and if we just had a sense of that, and what would be the worst scenario.
We'll have a lot of rolling adjustments also on this during the first year as there's more and more clarifications. So one of the things I think we ought to be prepared for in the Planning Commission is to start with our framework of what we're going to be putting together to be compliant early on, and then make sure that we're constantly evaluating the changes and seeing how much that's modified. Probably for the next 2 years, we'll go through that process.
Yeah.
I think the lots, in my opinion, living in Atherton for many years, the lots around El Camino Real and also Alameda del Pagas would probably be prime candidates where somebody would want to build like a townhouse or something, or double-story lot, because those are cheaper lots to buy, and they're easier to subdivide.
I wish they had left it giving us just an allotment of houses, because then we as a community could decide that, yes, along El Camino, we could look at our map and pick places, and then we would promote and just zone them to be multiple residents. But that's not what happened.
Yeah.
What happened?
We will probably still have that conversation. So
well, I know,
but
then that one's one where it can be creative on. On this one, we can't. They're saying anyone can cut their land in half and make it 2. That's a pretty big deal.
Very big
It
deal.
diminishes the value of the landowners. That's the problem for those of us who are landowners.
Agreed. It's troubling.
Okay. All right. Very good discussion, everyone. Thank you so much. And a motion to adjourn.
Yes,
And he's got his meat pounder.
Yeah.
You've got your meat pounder.
According to the instructions I had, we had to do it individually. So I'll close the planning commission. We're going to roll over to the regularly scheduled planning commission. This is why nobody